there, Dawn McVey here, and welcome to this week's Make It Monday video. Today we're going to talk about using a variety of different stamps in your collection to create a square frame. So hopefully this will help you to look at your stamps a little bit differently and maybe even get a little bit more mileage out of some of those stamps while we're at it. So let's get right to today's project. Okay, so I have a couple examples of this technique that I've done in the past. With this particular card here, I use the Boutique Borders Father stamp set, and I overlapped each one of the frame sections so that I kind of ended up with sort of a crosshatch in the corners, and it made for a much smaller frame. Here's one that I did using Boutique Border Sympathy, and I lined up the corners of the frame, or those straight edges, so that this one created a much larger frame. Now you can do this with really with a lot of the Boutique Borders stamp sets, but you can, I'm sure you guys will be really creative and come up with a lot of different sets that you can use to create your own square frames like this. So I'm excited to see your take on this challenge. To get started today, this is Boutique Borders Birthday, and just like on this card here where I put the straight edges to the inside of the frame, so the flourished portion was on the outside of the frame. Today I'm going to reverse that, and I'm going to put the decorative side in and the straight edge out. So the result is a little bit smaller frame because the decoration part is pointing inward, and it's just a totally different look. Obviously you could do it either way, but for today's frame I'm going to go ahead and go with the straight edge on the outside. So I'm just going to stamp half of this particular frame image. I'm only going to ink half. You want to be sure and ink the same half every time, otherwise there may be some leftover ink residue after you've stamped it once, and you don't want to get that accidentally somewhere else on your card when you're stamping. When I do these frames, I like to start with the top, just because this lets me gauge exactly how far away from the top edge that I'm stamping on is, particularly in the case of where you're doing this on an actual card front. This lets you kind of gauge exactly how far down your frame is going to be. So I generally start with the front because usually I'm putting them more toward the top edge of the frame than the bottom. So now we're going to re-ink that same half again. I also find it easier when I'm doing these to turn the cardstock so that I'm always, working with whatever is the top edge of the cardstock at the moment. It just makes it a little easier to line things up. Now I'm looking at the straight edge only here. I'm ignoring all these flourishes, and I'm just looking at the straight edge in relation to, let me move that up, in relation to where I've got the straight edge over here. I'm going to try and line those points up a little bit. I don't necessarily want them to touch, but I want them pretty close. You see how I tucked those points right up in the corners together? Now we'll repeat that on the other side. Again, I spun the cardstock around, so I'm working with what is now the top edge. When you're trying to line things up and keep things really straight, I just find that to be a little bit easier. And now we're going to do one more. Essentially now we're just connecting the bottom two corners. This time I don't spin it around because I don't really have that straight edge along the cardstock to use quite so easily because I'm farther up from the bottom. So here I'm just lining up the bottom edge of this straight line with the bottom edge of this straight line in relation to the straight edge here. Again, ignoring those flourishes and just paying attention to the straight lines. And the result is a pretty straight square. That's the nice thing about if you're using the boutique borders for this technique. In a lot of cases, there is a straight line somewhere in the image, and it makes it a little bit easier when you're lining things up. So the next thing I'm going to do before I move on to embellishing is I'm going to go ahead and stamp the sentiment. This is also from Boutique Borders Birthday. I'm going to use some dark chocolate here. We're just going to put this right underneath the frame. Again, having that nice straight edge there makes it pretty easy to line up the straight edge of the top of the sentiment. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I've gone ahead and die cut some flowers and leaves. These are Delightful Dahlia Editions, and I'm gonna stamp these flowers first. I've got kind of a unique color combo here. I tried this on one other card a while back, and I really loved how it looked, so I thought I would give it a whirl again today. We're starting out with Raspberry Fizz ink on the first most solid layer. Sorry, that's kind of out of your line of sight, isn't it? Now we'll do the next one. The next layer, I've got Pure Poppy ink. This will give us some shading on the flower. And one more. And the last one for the flowers, the last layer, I'm going to use Winter Wisteria ink, which is a purple, which sounds like it might be kind of funny looking, but it ends up adding a really pretty depth of color. You just want to rotate around so you have it lined up just right. Okay, so the flowers are finished, and now I'm going to go ahead and stamp 3 leaves. The leaves have 2 layers each, but I am just going to use New Leaf ink on both layers. These flowers are pretty bright and punchy, and therefore I want to let them have a really kind of bright, punchy leaf to help balance them out. So we're just going to go with New Leaf ink for both layers. That's the first layer. And then one more. Okay. That is it for stamping. So now we just need to assemble everything. I've got a card base here, this rustic cream cardstock. It's already been cut and scored. And to that, I'm gonna add the framed panel that we stamped. I'm gonna use some big foam adhesive squares to add this panel. I don't skimp on the foam adhesive because I don't want this to end up getting all saggy and weird if I only did the corners or whatever. So I'm always sure to anchor the center also so that it doesn't get deflated in the mail or whatever as it's handled down the road. Put this right on the center. And then I'm going to also use some foam adhesive for the flowers. Just put about 3 small squares. And lastly, a little bit of regular adhesive on the bottom portion of each of these leaves. You just kind of want to play with your placement a wee bit before you mash everything down, just to make sure you have it all exactly where you want it. Like a little white space in this corner to show. So I'm going to leave that kind of open. And I think we'll go with that. And lastly, pull each of these forward and a couple little gemstones here that I'm going to add to the center of each of these flowers. These are clear gemstones that I colored with a red Copic, which is a really easy way to get more mileage out of those clear gemstones. And there you have it. I can't wait to see your take on this week's challenge. If you'd like to play along this week, be sure to head over to Nicole Hetty's blog, where you can leave a link to your project so we can all see what you came up with. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day. This has been Dawn McVey with Make It Monday.